Yo, what's up, everyone? Today, we're going to talk about Metal Gear Solid for a variety of reasons, some of which I'm sure you can already guess, and that is half of what I'm going to be talking about today, the current re-releases, the collection, the Master Collection Volume 1, specifically. So, I am, like many others out there, I am the biggest fan of Metal Gear Solid, and I want to talk a bit about Metal Gear Solid today. So, I first played. It was a very weird one to get into, but I was like a younger kid, and I didn't know much better. But I first played Metal Gear Solid 2. Specifically, I got like the Substance version used at a GameStop, however many moons ago that was. Don't tell me when that came out. I don't want to know. That was the first one I played, so I know like when MGS2 came out, and this is gonna be like. There's probably going to be some spoilers in here, maybe. I'm not going to specifically just be talking about story stuff, but just so you are aware in case you're playing the collection for the first time. I don't want to, like, ruin anything for you. So, I first played Metal Gear Solid 2, and I know when that came out, a lot of people were a little weirded out by Ride and be like, this isn't Snake. All the trailers and stuff showed Snake. I thought we were going to be playing as Snake. And I think even some of the trailers showed Snake in the Big Shell, like purposeful misdirection on like Kojima and his team's part, which I don't know, I think that's kind of cool. I don't think you really get to get anything like that anymore, which is understandable. It is kind of a bait and switch, but I don't know, there's a certain magic to that kind of stuff that I feel like we just don't get anymore, and it's understandable, especially with how streamlined development is. I feel like with how big budget everything is and how strict timelines and everything are, and like most of, maybe not most, but a lot of what's coming out today like isn't even finished, and I don't necessarily place any blame on developers. They're just working within a budget and time frame they can, but like especially with more and more modern technology and more modern video games, I feel like there's a huge lack of experimentation, and it's just like you can't really anymore. Like when a game costs $5-10 million to produce, there is no spending time and resources and manpower to try some idea out that you're not even sure if it's going to like make it into the final cut. You can't really do that anymore, and there's a huge shame in that. I also like, I'm part of the problem, like just like many other people. It's not like I'm not buying modern games and I'm not playing modern games, like stuff like the Resident Evil 4 remake. That stuff's like incredible. So it's not like I'm not participating in modern gaming, and I play a huge spectrum of different games. Like I've been playing the new Forza that came out. It's, let me not date this video too much. Forza 2023 or whatever. But then I'll play Persona 1 on the PS1. It's like my spectrum is literally all over the place. I appreciate the entire medium greatly, and I do play modern games. And so that's what I'm saying. Like I understand that it's just, in the modern climate, we can't really experiment anymore. But I also, I don't know what the solution to that is. And unless we start making, games that were as graphically impressive, as intricate as PS2 games and just stop there, I feel like then we could. But then, a majority of people aren't going to be buying stuff like that anymore. Unless it's like a re-release or a collection of something that already exists. But I don't think most people are going to buy something, say all of a sudden there was a Metal Gear Solid 6, and yeah, I know Kojima wouldn't be involved anymore, but say that happened, and then it didn't look much better than Sons of Liberty or Snake Eater. Like, honestly, I don't know if I would care if it's just new Metal Gear or something, and they're able to, like, experiment and try weird things. Like, I think I'd still be playing it, but I also wouldn't expect, like, your average Joe to go to a GameStop and buy a game that looks like that in 2023. It's funny that I'm saying that, because that's essentially exactly what's happening right now with the Master Collection, but I'm talking about like a new, like, full price release or something. And I think there's half the problem too, is especially when you're like printing a disc and printing a Blu-ray and stuff. I feel like a lot of companies try to justify a $60 price tag or $70. I still haven't bought a game for $70, I don't think. I don't know if I want to. But I can understand both sides of the coin to this. It's like game development is really expensive. Very expensive, and I do want people to get paid for the work. And, there were, like, back in the day, there were, like, Super Nintendo games and stuff, or if you're talking about, this is something I'm actually going to talk about at some point, but if we're talking about, like, Star Fox or, like, Virtua Racing on the Genesis, that had special extra chips inside the cartridges. That stuff was like, like $100 back then. I don't know how that would be adjusted for inflation, but I don't know, maybe you're somewhere around the $200 mark or something. Like, so like I understand that games technically are cheaper than they've ever been, but especially depending on where you're from and what's going on in your life, like your disposable income isn't quite the same purchasing power as it used to be, So for a lot of people, and especially if they're a little more casual, which there's nothing wrong with that, they might buy 1 to 2 games a month or something. Like, I don't know, I'm trying to guess what a casual person would do. And, if you have maybe $150 or something that you can spend a month on frivolous stuff, like a $70 game, that's half your budget right there. And that's a huge commitment. While I understand, economically speaking, you are technically getting cheaper, better games than you were before, as far as like the fidelity of it and the graphical presentation and the voice acting and the cutscenes and stuff. Like, as far as that is concerned, not like an intrinsic entertainment value, but as far as like a production value level, these, games have ballooned way past what we were playing, like even on the PS1 and Saturn and N64 and all that kind of stuff. So like, I understand that for that kind of price, it's cheaper than it's ever been, but at the same time, in, current year economic times, it's also kind of wrapped back around to being like, it's a big decision to make to purchase a game, especially if you're not throwing all your free money towards it, like, someone like me might. So, it kind of, and, I'm kind of bringing up the current state of the industry, because I do feel like stuff like Metal Gear Solid, this kind of stuff, I don't feel like this kind of stuff comes out anymore, and I feel like preserving a legacy of this kind of stuff is more important now than maybe it's ever been, because I feel like even during the 360 and PS3 generation, I feel like even a more casual, gamer, I feel like even somebody more casual would probably maybe still have their PS2 or original Xbox around, and I think even in like a normal 360, I think you could still play the original Xbox version of Metal Gear Solid 2. So it's not like, back then maybe the HD collection made a little less sense as far as peer preservation. But, you want to play Metal Gear Solid 2, 720p, 16:9 back in the day, So I'd say, like, nowadays, especially with, like, say we take the PS5 and it's like, besides PS4, it's like complete lack of backwards compatibility that's native. Stuff like the Master Collection is important in regards to preservation, especially for people that only play on consoles. However, things start getting a little more muddied when you start talking about like the Series X and its backwards compatibility and the fact that you can play the original HD collection. So let me talk a little more about what I feel about Metal Gear Solid before I start getting into why I think this new collection is incredibly problematic and really unfortunate. And I'm going to say right now, me saying anything isn't to take away the fun that anybody's having. That's not what I'm here to do. I don't like people that do that where they're like, oh, you can't have fun with this because it has problems or something like that. Like, if you're having fun with it and you feel like your $60 purchase was worth the price tag, then that's up to you. You are allowed to vote with your wallet just as much as I am allowed to not purchase the collection. That's how this works. If you are getting value out of it and you are enjoying it, or you're experiencing it for the first time, that is fantastic. That is incredible, and I hope you enjoy it. But I am also well within my right to completely tear this thing apart as far as a fan of the series goes. So, as I was saying before, when I was younger, I picked up Metal Gear Solid 2, and I didn't play Metal Gear Solid 1 yet. It was just like, to me, when I was younger, I don't think I really thought too much about like sequels and as far as what order I should play things in. It's like, oh, there's a game at GameStop, I could afford it with my allowance or something, and I'm gonna play it or whatever. I don't know if I'm dating myself perfectly, if you can kind of even guess how old I was. But like, I was young enough where I think some of the more political stuff was lost on me as far as, the overarching political plot of Metal Gear Solid. I'm not saying it's talking about necessarily real world politics. I'm just talking about like the government stuff and like the nuclear stuff. I think it was more like I liked the characters and the more intrinsic story happening between them. And now as I'm playing them again, as I've gotten older and older, it's like, yeah, I totally get what's going on here, and I like the stuff just as much. But trust me, like, I don't quite remember how old I was, but like when I was playing Metal Gear Solid 3, like I don't think I really cared too much about the Cold War stuff happening. I was just like, oh, I like Snake, and this is a prequel. I'm like, this is cool. Not that, I really enjoyed all the characters, the bosses, and everything. But yeah, so like when I played Metal Gear Solid 2, I had no preconceived notion as to, Snake and all this kind of stuff. So I wasn't concerned when all of a sudden when I was, just playing as Raiden for the rest of the game. I liked Raiden. I still think I like him more than Snake. And maybe it's because I played Metal Gear Solid 2, like, first, and so I got to, like, get really attached to him as, like, the main character. Not that I don't, like, I absolutely love Snake. But, I think maybe that being my first game kind of both softened the blow of not playing as Snake throughout the whole game. And, I started with Substance, so I got, like, Snake Tales right away, and then all the VR missions and stuff. So, I got plenty of, Snake action going on. But, yeah, no, I loved Raiden, and I think, and especially as, like, an adult and understanding what they were trying to do with everything. I think the dichotomy between, like, Snake and Raiden being, like, he is just a soldier growing up on all the VR training of what Snake was essentially doing. I think that's really cool. And it shows how, like, Raiden may have done the same stuff as Snake in VR, but because, it's not real and all that kind of stuff, it definitely changed how he was as a person and as a soldier or whatever, and then obviously the meeting that changes a lot of things too and all that kind of stuff. I don't want to, like, get too specific or anything like that. I don't want to drag this video out to be, like, an hour long, but what I'll tell you is like, I played that when I was younger, and I think that was the first time now that I really appreciated what a good story in a game could do. Because, like, when I was even younger than that, I was mostly playing, like, PS1 and some N64 and stuff. And, later on, I've gone back to, like, even older consoles and stuff like that. But that was kind of the era I grew up in. I think I was too young to really appreciate, like, a good story in a game. And as far as, like, one of my favorite genres nowadays is, like, JRPGs. Like, I love Persona stuff, SMT. I love, some Fire Emblem, some Final Fantasy. Like, I'll play just about, like, any JRPG, honestly. Even if you want to count, like, Atelier, because that has, like, turn-based RPG combat and stuff like that. But when I was younger, like, the most I delved into it is, like, I played some Final Fantasy X, and it wasn't really until, like, I was like a later teenager that I started getting more into JRPGs and stuff. But, like, I love Final Fantasy X story and stuff. Not so much, like, I don't think I really thought too hard about the gameplay, which is funny considering, like, I almost care more about that now than even the story in a JRPG. But, so, I think Metal Gear Solid 2, when I played that, I was like, oh, like, I'm like, video games can be, like, so much more than just a game to play to, like, pass time or something. Like, I've always been super into video games. But I think something like MGS2 really kind of blew the door open on, like, this is a whole medium that can be entirely different types of things and tell a very intricate, well thought out story. Depending. I know some people don't like Kojima's writing too much. I think it's incredible and wacky and fun. And, I feel like, especially, like, for my brain and what I enjoy, I feel like you can't predict what he was going to, like, write next, and I think that made it really exciting as, like, a player of one of the games, because it's not like it's the exact opposite of predictable. And I like, if this is your first time playing them, like, I don't think you can predict exactly what's going to happen. Like, I'd say not even, like, remotely close. Again, later, if you're more familiar with his work, maybe you're going to start to get it a little bit, but especially back during the PS2 era, I think him and his team, whatever, I think they're all incredibly talented people and really unique in the space of gaming. And so, it wasn't long after that, like, Metal Gear Solid 3 came out and stuff, and again, I saved up my my little kid allowance or whatever, and I got Metal Gear Solid 3, and I think that really, really cemented in me being, like, an absolute huge fan of the series. Like, MGS3 compared to 2, like, if I'd had to think about it nowadays, I'd probably like 2 just a tiny bit more, just due to, like, the overall story and the characters and Raiden and all that kind of stuff. But as far as, like, atmosphere and, like, gameplay and stuff, like, Metal Gear Solid 3 was insane back then. Like, the fact that I was so blown away that, like, I could change, like, all my camo stuff out, that I had to, like, hunt animals and, like, mushrooms and just, like, eat food and stuff like that. And like, especially because like I ended up getting it a little later, so I got Subsistence, so I got like that 3D camera and stuff, and it was like a mind blowing upgrade from MGS2 at the time, and I didn't back then notice that it was only 30 FPS compared to MGS2 60 and stuff like that. I was just playing games, So I think after the absolute masterpiece that was MGS3, I was like, whoa, okay, this is serious. I'm like, these games are some of my favorite games of all time, like straight up. And later on, I ended up getting the Twin Snakes when I had a GameCube. I didn't play MGS1's PS1 version until much later. So if anything, I've gotten like way more accustomed to the Twin Snakes, which is probably not the norm in the fan base. I think they're both incredible. I kind of nowadays, I think aesthetically, I like the original more. But like Twin Snakes gameplay wise, having all the features from MGS2, yeah, it probably makes it a lot easier hanging on ledges and first person aiming and all this kind of stuff. But like, man, does that game play good? It plays super good. And like like Shadow Moses Island is such a great location for like stealth stuff. And like as far as the entire series, I think Liquid Snake is like my favorite character. And when I played that when I was younger, I was like, oh, he's like Snake's like brother. I didn't care about Solidus too much. I think he looked too different. Maybe too old compared to Snake. Nowadays, I get what they're trying to do with like the clones and they're like, aging faster. Like I think supposed to be like that sheep that was cloned and stuff. But I don't think I was really putting two and two together when I was that young. I was like, oh, that's like the other clone of the boss or whatever. But like Liquid, I was like, oh, that's like he's got blonde hair and it's longer and he's got like the recessive genes. Does he have the recessive genes? Is that what he's all mad about? He's all mad about Boss's genes and all that, and how Snake's got the better ones or something. I'm working on replaying MGS1 right now. I'll get back to you on that. So yeah, and I think like at that point I was kind of caught up with what was going on. I did play a bit of Metal Gear 1 and 2 through Subsistence, but those weren't really clicking with me when I was younger, just due to the drastic gameplay differences. So when Metal Gear Solid 4 came out, that was like, I think that was pretty much one of the first games that I got to like play and see in like anything above 480i, and that blew my mind. Like, my god, that game looked incredible on like a 1080p TV. And like I said, especially being like one of the first HD things I really played, I was like, whoa. Like, it was such a step up from like PS2 and GameCube stuff. I think I played a little of Soul Calibur 2 in 720p on the Xbox, but I'm not quite sure which one came first. But yeah, no, Metal Gear Solid 4 kind of blew me away. I loved the story stuff. I loved Old Snake, the gameplay, the crouch walking, that was incredible. And I'm not going to drag this on too long, but Peace Walker, I love Peace Walker. Peace Walker is probably still my favorite game in the series, honestly. When that first came out on the PSP, that was like mind-blowing for a portable game for me. And I was really, really into the crouch walking. I don't know why, but I was like, oh my god, you can move while you're crouching now. And I loved all the camos and stuff in Peace Walker. But I think what made Peace Walker so cool for me, well, multiplayer. I did play with some people that I went to school with and stuff. But I loved like you could have like the light, the medium, and kind of heavy. I almost called it armor, but like camos where like you can be like Naked Snake, and you could hold like I think like 6 items and stuff like that, and you're like faster, or you can go like the medium route and kind of a little more defense, a little less items, a little less speed, or like the heavier stuff, and you could like tank a lot more hits and just hold less items. That was I don't know why, but that was so unbelievably cool to me. And I think part of it was like there is a reason for me to just go the Naked Snake route and just hoard all these items and just be fast and sneaky and die in a couple hits if I got caught. I do not think I was incredibly good at them or anything. I think I remember taking turns and stuff playing some either like Ground Zeroes or Phantom Pain with one of my friends. And he was making fun of how like aggressive I was playing and just absolutely slaughtering people. I was so bad about it. But, that's how I had my fun. Nowadays, I like to, Phantom Pain did come out, it's been 8 years since I'm recording this right now, which is absurd. But, I've been playing through past, 2 years or so. A little longer than that, just off and on some Ground Zeroes and Phantom Pain on PC, and it's just I go full pacifist now, I'm not hurting anybody. I got upset when I got to the mission of the Phantom Pain where you actually had to take out tanks, and I think you can skip it, And I did, because I'm like, I need to get, like, non-lethal options before I even want to do this. I'm trying to go through Phantom Pain without even using, like, a trank gun. I'm just trying to knock people out and stuff. So yeah, Peace Walker was incredible. And then I think things started getting super insane. Oh, and I did play Portable Ops. Portable Ops was fine. Played some Portable Ops Plus. I honestly had more fun with Portable Ops Plus because I feel like it was less bloated. I know there wasn't like a story happening, but I kind of just, at that point, I think I was at least starting to appreciate the gameplay a little more. But yeah, so I think like seriously the most hype was with Metal Gear Solid 5 and Ground Zeroes and all that. And when Ground Zeroes first came out, I could not get enough of that game. The gameplay was like, it was like almost a bigger leap from like 2 to 3 than, you know, like compared to like Peace Walker and 4 to Ground Zeroes. Like, that is seriously probably still like the best stealth action game to have like ever existed. And I'm saying Ground Zeroes, not even the Phantom Pain, because I think Camp Omega is just like such a tightly designed like stealth action kind of playground for Snake's like moveset in that game. I'm talking about like it's a fighting game, but I feel like it is so intricately and tightly designed, and there's so much you can do with it. Not that the Phantom Pain isn't way more expansive, there's way more item, but I feel like as a consequence, it got less tightly designed and stuff like that. I still think the Phantom Pain's like incredible and stuff. I think I was just at my peak of hype during Ground Zeroes, because it's also like, then what's next? The Phantom Pain. It's gonna be like this, but bigger. Like, are you crazy? I'm like, I couldn't even like fathom what that was gonna be like. I already thought like Camp Omega and just running around there was like the coolest thing ever. And, you know, Phantom Pain, like a first playthrough, is incredible. I just think in retrospect, Ground Zeroes is a lot more tight. Even if it's like, you know, a tenth of the game, I'd rather have a tenth of the game that's more, you know, tightly designed. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself there. So, point being, I don't know if it's come across, but like Metal Gear Solid has been one of my favorite franchises in like all of gaming, and I think they're incredibly important as far as like a legacy of video games is concerned. And this is the kind of stuff that I think, you know, as long as people are still playing games in 50 years or something, I still think these games are going to be like relevant and important for new players and stuff to play, you know, 50 years from now. So obviously, I like a good excuse to go back and replay a game, right? So I think a lot of us do, and I think HD remasters are an incredible way to do that, because you're getting essentially a shiny new coat of paint on an already, you know, probably good game. I'm sure there's been some remasters of some not so good games, but it's like, so when I finally got my own HD TV, and I had a 360, and I was able to get the Metal Gear Solid HD collection, I'm getting ahead of myself. I also bought it on the Vita, mind you, and that was so cool to me, because I think later I got the MGS3 port on 3DS, so Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 on the Vita were like my first like full-fledged portable Metal Gear experience kind of going on there. Like, obviously I played Peace Walker, I played Portable Ops and Portable Ops Plus, but like it was like, oh, I'm playing like the full console Metal Gear Solid games on like a handheld, and I think they were either 480p or 544p. They might have actually been native res on the Vita. I can't quite remember. But then later I, you know, got it on the 360 with Peace Walker HD, and oh my god, that was so cool for me, because I already loved Peace Walker so much, and now I get it at like I think it might have, it was at least 720p, maybe higher, but at least 720p, 60 FPS compared to, I think Peace Walker was 20 FPS on the PSP, and I'm not like exaggerating, I literally think it was like 20. Which is understandable. The game looked absolutely incredible. Like, still one of the best looking PSP games. So yeah, I got the HD collection on the 360 later, and that was such a cool experience for me, playing them in widescreen, playing them in 720p, playing them in 720p on an older. It was like maybe like 30 some inch, maybe even 1080p Element TV. So that 720p looked so good. And at that time, you know, I didn't have anything like I do now as far as upscalers and line doublers like the RetroTink and the OSSC. So, like, this was like the best way for me to play MGS 2 and 3 at the time. You know, you might see some footage repeating. I thought I had less to say about this than I did. So, just excuse me. I'm a one-man production here. I have like 30 some minutes of some Sons of Liberty gameplay that I caught captured or whatever before recording this, and I thought it was going to be enough, but I'm passionate. I'm passionate about this, so I hope you don't mind. So HD Collection, Bluepoint. Bluepoint's work. Now, I've been seeing some stuff about this, and I'm kind of two minds about this. So, I'm sure there were some problems with, especially like the higher frame rate in MGS3 and stuff. And honestly, I'll be honest, it has been a minute since I've touched Bluepoint's work. The last time I played through 2 and 3 fully was actually on the Vita. I really love portable systems, and that was not Bluepoint. That was a different company, but maybe some of it was based on Bluepoint's work. I'm not sure. Because then later I got, like, before it got delisted, I got MGS2 through Good Old Games. So, and there's modern fan patches and stuff, and we're going to talk about that more in a second. So, yeah, so I've been seeing people nowadays, and I'm really not trying to throw anybody under the bus or talk about, or make anybody feel stupid for their opinions or anything. I understand that not everybody is as, like, technically in tune with this kind of stuff, and, you don't have to be. If your interest doesn't lie in, like, pure technical nonsense, then that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Just, enjoy what you're playing, and that's all you need to do. But, like, for me, half of my fun in playing video games and stuff is understanding the technology behind it, the development behind it, what I'm looking at, why I'm looking at it. Like, that is seriously, like, half of my enjoyment of things. If you couldn't tell, this YouTube channel wouldn't exist if I didn't care about this kind of stuff. So, I've been seeing some people talk about how, Bluepoint's work wasn't that good, and they introduced a lot of bugs, and there's, like, some visual issues and stuff, and I do think there was some visual issues in 2, I think, but, like, nothing that I would be able to think of off the top of my head. It wasn't, like, a glaring issue, like, oh my god, like an entire texture was missing from a wall or something like that, it wasn't anything like that. Like, in my head, I can't picture what the problems were, but I also just don't want to feel like I'm gaslighting these people into thinking that, there wasn't any issues and I'm just misremembering because it's been too long. But I think overall their work was very good, considering, it's so weird with the modern state of even re-releases, but, like, when you bought the HD collection back then, you put your disc in, you play the game, it's HD, it's widescreen, you're playing some Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3, Peace Walker, and it just works. And, so in my head, I'm thinking, like, well, that's incredible. And I think it's because our standards have gotten lower, especially the last couple of years. But, it's completely functional, it looks great, it runs good. And seeing people talk about how Bluepoint's work wasn't, like, the collection's fine. Like, Bluepoint introduced a bunch of bugs and glitches anyways. And it's like, I don't think they did. And I think, especially looking at stuff like the Demon's Souls remake, I think Bluepoint has some pedigree behind them. I really do think they know and they care about what they're doing, and I don't think it's fair to throw them under the bus. I don't remember, back when the original HD collection came out, I don't personally remember people complaining about it. I don't think people were. So I feel like that's kind of a revisionist look at what was happening with the original HD collection. I feel like it wasn't like that, but I also don't think I was quite as in tune with, like, hardware and stuff as I am nowadays back then. So I could be wrong. I didn't have, like, the greatest, like, internet connection and stuff, and I wasn't really going around message boards and social media stuff. So maybe I'm wrong, but, feel free to correct me. But just make sure you back up what you're saying. I'm getting a little tired of seeing people say stuff like, for example, so let's talk about Metal Gear Solid 1 for a second. So I don't really like seeing, posts and stuff that talk about, okay, so it doesn't have functional analog support. You can use the left analog stick on your PS5 or your Series X or whatever to control Snake, right? But it's just acting like the D-pad. Metal Gear Solid 1 did have analog support. The analog controllers were out on the PS1 already. I don't know about the DualShock, but there was analog controllers with, like, concave analog sticks before then. I believe I'm thinking. I only have a DualShock nowadays, but I believe that's what those controllers were before. But it did support, like, actual 3D movement, and with, like, fan patches and stuff too, with the Good Old Games PC port. Good Old Games didn't port it. That's just where you can get it. I think that port was from like 99 or something. I have an old video on my channel where I talked about that. It's audio only, and the mic quality is probably awful. But like, I've looked at some Metal Gear before, and you can patch analog movement in the PC port. But yeah, Metal Gear Solid 1 had analog support, like full analog support. It wasn't just acting like a D-pad and like 4 cardinal directions kind of thing. And I'm seeing people talk about like, no, Metal Gear Solid 1 never had analog support. And then I'm seeing people like reply with pictures of the back of MGS1's game case showing like, you know, DualShock support or analog support or whatever it says. And then usually I'm seeing replies like, oh, well, you don't need it anyways. It's like have some standards. And also, if you're so sure of something, I don't know. Like, I would still, if I'm going to make a claim that somebody's just completely incorrect, I think I would look it up beforehand. I don't know if that's just me trying to save face and not look like an idiot. And I don't really like trying to spread misinformation. Like, I try to be accurate when I'm talking about. And if I don't know something, I usually just say, oh, I don't know, or I couldn't find it, or whatever. But like, I'm seeing people crawl out of the woodwork that are just so sure of things that are just completely incorrect. And I feel bad. I feel like I'm being mean, and I'm not necessarily trying to be. But it's also frustrating as like such a huge fan of the series that I feel like so many people are just accepting complete like mediocre releases just because it's some new Metal Gear and you can play it on modern consoles. It's really frustrating as a huge fan because I want the best for the series and not the most under budget rush job Konami was willing to pay for. I pretty much refuse to put any of this on developers. I feel like if you get into developing anything as as your profession, I feel like there's got to be some passion behind that. Like, you kind of care about what you're doing at least you know enough to know what you're doing. And it usually comes down to, especially knowing Konami's history, it's got to be just some executives at Konami budgeting certain things and just giving a small team of people not enough budget to try to port some stuff to, 5 different platforms. I don't know if this had a base Xbox One version, but, we at least got Switch in both the handheld and docked variety, which, you do have to make changes for that, along with PS4, PS5, because I think the PS5 version is actually different than just the PS4 version as far as, being a native port, and then Series S and X. And then PC, obviously. So, yeah, there's plenty of different platforms you actually have to port to, and if they don't have enough money, if they don't have enough resources, and they're just digging through Bluepoint's work, work that they themselves didn't originally work on, they may not understand certain aspects of the code and stuff like that, especially considering, I think some of it, like some of the effects and stuff in MGS2 were essentially kind of hard I always miss my R's, hard-coded around, or I think I added one there, hard-coded around, the 480i window of MGS2, and I think Bluepoint had to, remake and rework effects for a 720p render window, whatever you want to call it. I'm acting like I don't know what I'm talking about. So rework it so it, works properly within the 720p window. And so I think half the problem is with certain stuff being busted running it at a high resolution, because, modders did an hour or two after it released on PC, run it at 4K, both MGS2 and 3, and some of the effects and stuff, and I think the HUD was busted in MGS2, which tells me that maybe these developers tried to say okay, we're gonna at least run 1080p or something, and saw that there's graphical issues and stuff, and issues with the HUD, and they're like, well, it works at 720p. We don't have time to do anything else for it. Maybe we can upscale it to 1080p, but, it works at 720p. If it works, that's what we're going to roll with. We don't have time or the budget to do anything else, or manpower or whatever. So I think that would be the most likely scenario, and I wish I knew what was going on with the development of this. I think we all want to know what was going on with this. So here's something else I want to talk about. I'm seeing some lingo and jargon going around that makes no sense, and I think it's from people that just don't understand rendering resolutions and upscaling and all this kind of stuff. And again, I don't care if somebody doesn't understand that. I'm never gonna belittle someone for not understanding how this kind of stuff works, because there's plenty in life that I don't understand, and I hope somebody wouldn't talk down to me about it just because my expertise might be in a completely different field. So again, I'm not trying to be mean to anybody. There's nothing like that, but I also want to properly educate people on certain like terminology. And again, I wouldn't mind so much if I didn't see people so incredibly incorrectly confident in what they're saying, and like so many people just agreeing with people that are like just like factually wrong, and it's very frustrating. So I'm seeing some people are like, talking about, oh well, it's like up converted to 1080p. So here's the thing: I've never heard in all my years of being like a nerd, like a tech nerd, I've never heard someone say up converted in regards to any sort of resolution changes. Now, I've heard upscaled because upscaling is indeed a thing. To take something like the M Classic, like that upscales an image to 1440p. And then you can obviously actually render something at a higher resolution. And I think people don't understand the difference of that, which is fine, but I would very much stress and urge someone to look into what they're talking about before they just confidently spread misinformation. So say, your actual render resolution, let's talk about that first. So say, you got Metal Gear Solid 2 and it's running at 720p. All right. So it is internally running the game at, 1280 by 720 pixels, right? But okay, say I'm playing on the 360. Okay. So I want the image to come across a little more cleanly on my 4K display, right? Okay, so let me use my M Classic. M Classic is going to upscale the output image and try its best to fit it within like a 1440p window. And it cannot possibly touch or adjust the internal rendering resolution. Now, to try to simplify this as much as possible, if something is upscaled to 1440p, compared to something that is rendering at 1440p, and especially say if the base image is like 720p, the actual rendered 1440p image is going to look leagues beyond the upscaled 1440p image. Upscaling cannot work magic. All upscaling can really do is just make something a little less crappy. And, if you understand what you're looking at and you understand that's what you're getting into when you're using like upscalers and stuff, then fantastic. Line doublers work a little differently. And that's a whole other thing that we're not going to get into right now because it's honestly not that important. The footage you're seeing is the RetroTink 2X Pro. It is just Metal Gear Solid 2 on the PS2 is 480i, and it's just line doubling that to like 960i or something like that. So that's line doubling, and that's what you're getting in the footage. I wanted to use like the original PS2 version because I want to talk about that a little bit as well, considering it's 60 FPS. It's only 480i, but it's 60 FPS on the PS2. So, I've seen people say, oh, but like, Metal Gear Solid 3, it's up converted to 1080p. Those words don't mean anything. What you're saying doesn't mean anything. And also, even if it's up converted to 1080p, okay, well then what's the difference between me plugging in my 360 and then just using my M Classic upscaler to upscale it to 1440p? Why is that the better option? So here's the thing. Let's talk about rendering resolution for a bit. We're going to talk about MGS2 and 3, and then we're going to talk about MGS1. So, MGS2, right? Let's talk about the PS2 version. So, on the original PS2, it is 480i. There's no progressive signal involved. You could probably force it with GSM or another program. But it is 480i normally, and there's a multitude of ways you could run this nowadays. If you have a old backwards compatible PS3, pop in the PS2 disc. I haven't checked the compatibility on that. You could do that. You could run your PS2 through something like a RetroTink. I really don't think those things are that expensive, or if your TV still supports component input, get a decent set of component cables for your PS2. And if you actually want to like spend some money on it, because I understand that's not always an option. I've gotten a lot of what I've gotten gradually and over the years. As far as how my PS2 setup is concerned, because, I want to talk about, like, least good scenario and, like, best case scenario. I feel like my PS2 setup's, like, one of the best case scenarios. I can run it to my RetroTink. Sometimes I'll throw the M Classic on top of it, but sometimes I kind of don't really like how that almost over-sharpens an already interlaced image a little too much. But, through RetroTank, I have a Brooks adapter that I mainly got for, like, my arcade stick. Some of the KOF collections, like the Japanese ones, are very good. And I had those before I had Neo Geo stuff. But with a Brooks adapter, you can also just straight up, like, plug in a PS3 controller, I think even PS4 controller, and, like, wirelessly. And so, like, I can just hook up my PS2, actually line double it, and then just use, like, a wireless PS3 controller and just play that on my, like, modern display like that. And honestly, if you know what to expect, and if you don't have unrealistic expectations about what, an interlay signal from my PS2 can do, and it's already analog, there's no digital out like the GameCube. If you know what you're getting into, that solution's really not bad, especially if you're not sitting 2 inches from your TV. If you're sitting like an okay distance away from your TV and you know what you're getting into, it looks pretty good. And then you get, a little bit more of a modern controller. You get it wireless. It's great stuff. So, but as far as lower end of things, a lot of people have phones nowadays. I'm sure of it. I would be surprised if even my phone couldn't emulate a PS2 game nowadays. Emulation has gotten more and more and more efficient over the years, and I've always dabbled in emulation. Now, I'm one that loves original hardware, and that's, if you've watched my channel, you shouldn't be surprised. I'm always trying to use original hardware, but I've never, ever shied away from, like, talking about how emulation's cool, and it's very cool, and it's incredibly good for preservation. And if you're not, a psychopath like me, and you have to have your 480i PS2 image, there is nothing stopping you from running MGS2 in 4K through, like, PCX2 or something. And I hate the argument that some people make. It's like, oh, well, piracy is wrong. And it's like, yes, it is. Nobody's advocating for that. It's like, I think some people, due to their lack of education on the subject, act like all emulation is only piracy. Because of most of my systems being modded and stuff like that, it is so incredibly easy for me to just dump all my discs, my cartridges, my whatever. And that's how I do things if I ever go through the emulation route. It's like, you don't have to, like, resort to piracy to use emulation. Now, I understand ethically, there may be an argument to be had if you're talking about, $1,000 TurboGrafx 16 game that, the original developers will get no money for. That's a whole other ethical dilemma. I have my own opinions on that, and I don't want to be labeled one way or the other, so that's not what this video is about. We're not going to get into that. But if you're using emulation, no, you don't have to resort to piracy. You can dump your PS2 BIOS, you can dump your MGS2 disc, you can easily mod PS2s nowadays. You can do that stuff through a memory card. So there is no reason you can't do that. I guarantee a lot of modern smartphones can run MGS2 and at least double the internal rendering resolution, if not at least just play at its original resolution, but, like, on your phone. So don't tell me you don't have something that can do it. Now, I understand if you have, like, a cheap phone that can't do it and you have an old laptop, then in that case, if you have $60 to spare, just go buy the Master Collection. But if you have your old disc laying around, you have an okay PC, you have a Steam Deck, like, especially if you have, like, a Steam Deck, or you got a ROG Ally, or you're getting one of the new, what company's making that? The Legion Go or whatever. I forgot what company's doing that. There's, you could totally emulate some PS2 games with, like, a Steam Deck and stuff, and ROG Ally and stuff. You could emulate even PS3 stuff. So there's definitely totally normal, ethical ways that you can run these games at 4K nowadays. And so the thing is, we're going to talk about these modern collections, and we're talking about, like, Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3. So the Blue Point's original work on the 360 and PS3 were 720p, and I want to say, listening to, like, the most recent Digital Foundry podcast, probably 2x MSAA as far as anti-aliasing is concerned, and those collections look great. They looked great back then. I still think they look pretty good now, especially, again, if you know what you're getting into. So the new collections on all platforms, on all of them, are 720p. Now, on, like, Konami's website for the game and stuff like that, I think it was on their site where it said, like, 1080p, but asterisks, because it's, like, upscaled to 1080p. Like, don't give me that. That doesn't mean anything to me. I want these games to at least render at 1080p, at least on the PS4 and Switch. So these collections are running at the same resolution as the collections from, how long has it been? Like 10 years? If not longer? Maybe like 13 years? I want to say it was like 20 what was it? Was it 2012? Or was it even older than that? 2011 or something. It's been at least like 10 years. And then with whatever anti-aliasing they're using, or texture filtering, I don't know what exactly the problem is, the overall image quality is looking worse. And it's not like, oh, my expectations are too high, they're, remasters of PS2 games. No. They legitimately, like, straight up, factually, like, your image on the new collection is looking worse than the original HD collection. It's not a matter of opinion. It's not a matter of what I think looks better. It's just like whatever anti-aliasing or texture filtering is happening, there's a lot more jagged edges that aren't getting resolved in the image compared to, the decade-old HD release. I have never seen a re-release or collection or whatever in, modern year that looks worse than a previous HD collection, especially if we're talking about like a PS5 and Series X. It makes no logical sense to me. And I also don't like the argument that's like, oh, well, they never promised to remaster the games. Look, I've never heard of a company just porting something and keeping its original resolution and frame rate. That's asinine to me. And it's like, if you're porting something, you have to take into consideration of the expectations of the hardware you're porting it to. Nobody's buying a Series X game expecting it to run at 720p if it's a PS2 remaster, Again, maybe if something is incredibly heavy and poorly optimized and there's a lot of ray tracing between the global illumination, reflections and stuff going on, maybe you can find me something on the Series X that runs internally at 720p. But if my phone can run Metal Gear Solid 2 at 720p, why can't my Series X? Why can't a PS5 run it at higher than 720p? And you could, okay, let's not even make that argument. Why is it running at the same resolutions as the HD remasters from 10 years ago? Look, our standards on a PS5 and Series X, and especially PC, is not 720p. Maybe portably on a Steam Deck or portably on the Switch, yeah, 720p. Great. Why is, again, if you're making the argument that, oh, well, maybe they just couldn't run it any, it's hard to run these collections or anything like that. I've literally seen people say that. The handheld Switch code shouldn't be running at the same resolution as, a Series X. That's indefensible. There's no reason for that. It's not like it's emulation. It's not like we're talking about like we're emulating a PS1 game at 240p. I'd kind of understand it then, right? But no way does handheld Switch, have similar specs to, Series X. That's just not how this works. And again, if we're going to talk about the Switch release, having these portably, that's really cool. We've also had 2 and 3 portably before. And, 1, you can play the PS1 version on Vita or PSP. And then, okay, so I think they were about 544p. I think they actually were targeting, the actual screen resolution of the Vita with the HD collection on there. Metal Gear Solid 2, there's multiple, like, indoor sections and stuff where it's running at 60 FPS, right? And then the Switch version, Switch is much more powerful than a Vita. And then that's running at 30 FPS with everything. And then with frame drops on top of that. The Vita version of like MGS3, from what I've seen of the Switch port of MGS3, it runs better. That's completely inexcusable. That should not be happening. Some parts look like, like the original 3DS version of, MGS3, which could tank the frame rate quite a bit without, running higher clock speeds on a 2DS and stuff like that. But again, we're talking about a Switch. We're not talking about the 2DS. We're not talking about the 3DS. We're talking about the Switch. Switch is running things worse than the Vita. I've also seen people say, as far as, the Switch version is concerned, because the original collection was 60 FPS for both Snake Eater and MGS3, or MGS2. Some people are like, well, the Switch is just weaker than a PS3. No, it's not. No, it is not. You might be able to find some specific use case scenarios where, like, yeah, Gran Turismo 6 looks incredible. It is running higher than 720p. Ninja Gaiden Sigma is running higher than 720p. We can talk about MGS4, right? Running higher than 720p. But as far as actually being more powerful than the Switch, no, it's really, really not. And even just a random example off the top of my head, because I was thinking about this the other day, take something like Bayonetta. It was like 720p on 360 and PS3, and like it dropped frames all over the place in the PS3 version. And then you play it on the Switch, and it's usually like a locked 1080-60. I think there's like one section of the game where the frame rate dropped to 30, like literally one. but other than that, it's running at 1080p, 60 FPS. No, the Switch is not weaker than a PS3. I don't understand how people can say that when you're typing things out on your phone or your computer. Can you just, like, open up Wikipedia and look at the hardware specs? Or, like, okay, just look at a game that was on both systems, and then look at what it's rendering at, look at what it's running at. And maybe I'm expecting too much of people. I cannot imagine being so incredibly confident if I'm wrong. And I guess these people just don't know that they're wrong. And this sounds so condescending when I'm saying like this. I swear. Like, I'm not trying to crap on anybody. Like, I get it. If you really think you know, you know. But I'm like, especially in our modern digital age, I'm never sure of something, you know? If I'm ever trying to state something that I don't know is explicitly true, I'm always looking it up. I'm always trying to find the actual answer to something before I make myself look like an ass, you know? I don't think I fully understand that kind of aspect of internet culture, and I don't think I ever really will, and I'm okay with that. I'm somebody that really likes to know what's going on, specifically when it comes to like hardware and software, and I think maybe that's what's making it hard for me to step in the shoes of somebody that's just talking about the collection online, right? So I know I'm talking in circles a lot, and this is more of a free-form video, but this stuff is really, really important to me and a lot of other people. So, again, Switch version's running worse than the Vita version even, running worse than the PS3 and 360 versions. So, okay, these games, especially when we're talking about PS5 and Series X, there's no way, there's no excuse for MGS2 and 3 to not be running at 4K. I really, really don't like the argument, and I'm seeing people blow this out of proportion, where it's like, oh, these people want 8K and 120 FPS on a PS2 game. It's like no, like, certain consoles have certain standards. We have been far removed where 720p is the standard output resolution, standard rendering resolution of anything. It is not acceptable on a PS5 and Series X. Handheld Switch, sure, that's fairly acceptable, but it's knowing your target hardware and what the expectations of that target hardware is. Nobody's buying a Series X game and expecting it to run in 720p. Nobody is, especially when we're talking about a PS2 remaster. That is completely unacceptable. I feel like some people don't know that, yes, you know, when you're talking about like a PS2 game with PS2 rendering effects, that is going to be easier to run than a modern game. I almost feel like some people don't even understand that. And again, I'm trying to stop myself from sounding too mean. I'm just incredibly passionate and at least somewhat educated. So these games should have at least been 4K. They definitely could have been 60. I understand with this kind of stuff, sometimes, you know, targeting even higher frame rates than like 60 can definitely break certain physics engines and stuff like that, especially back in the PS2 era. Like, it's like, if we take Final Fantasy X, for example, I know a lot of people would complain about like the PC port and stuff not being 60, but it's like there's certain things that just trying to run the game at a higher frame rate literally just breaks how the game is running. But rendering resolution, no, that is completely unacceptable. Figure that out. Absolutely figure that out. You may have some graphical glitches and stuff like that, but that is something you can fix over maybe, you know, a physics engine just going completely wonky. Okay, let me back this up a bit. Say you really couldn't figure out how to run Bluepoint's work at 4K at a native port. You telling me that your Series X and a PS5 cannot emulate a PS2 game at 4K? If you take a Series X and you're in developer mode and you run a PS2 game, I'm certain you can run that at 4K. If they couldn't get Bluepoint's code to run at 4K, they could have resorted to like PS2 emulation or original Xbox emulation. Maybe. I mean, that's a lot harder, but you get what I'm trying to say. MGS2 was on both. Like, there's definitely a different route to go if they couldn't figure out how to render it at a higher resolution. But again, look at Snake Eater then. Snake Eater, it seems like it's running fine at 4K. There doesn't seem to be any major issues with it on PC. So again, how can somebody figure this out in an hour when, you know, however long this collection was being developed for, they didn't figure this out. Maybe they did figure it out, but then they wanted parity between MGS2 and 3. Okay, understandable. Fix MGS2 then. Like, you know, it's not the developer's fault. I don't want to blame them. It's a budget. It's a time thing. It's, you know, everything I keep saying over and over again. There is no reasonable explanation that I could hear as to why these games shouldn't be running at 4K 60 on a PS5 and Series X. And it's not asking for too much. I really don't like that argument. Like, it's like, people are just asking for way too much for a PS2 remaster. Sorry, they're not even remasters. They're not. They're worse. For the PS2 re-releases. Like, no, nobody would, like, if you told me, Dynasty Warriors 5, I'm just trying to think of a random PS2 game, and Koei said they were porting it to PS5, right? Okay, and then you told me that it was going to be running at 480i. I'd be like, well, that's completely unacceptable. We run things at 4K now, or 1440p, or whatever. I would say that's completely unacceptable. And if they're like, oh, and people were like, no, well, they didn't promise to remaster it, that doesn't make it okay. It's like, it's still an unacceptable release that is not worth purchasing. And again, it gets even more muddied and more confusing when we talk about the Series X, because it does have backwards compatibility with the HD collection, and you could play MGS2 and 3 straight from your 360 disc, and you could play it looking better than the modern release. That is baffling to me. I don't have words for how irrational that is. I should not be throwing in my 360 disc and expecting the 360 code of MGS2 to look better than the Series X code. That is laughable. It is unacceptable. I don't understand how this happens. I mean, I kind of understand how it happens, but I don't understand how I'm supposed to be okay with that, or how it's asking too much to say that that's completely unreasonable. Okay, so I hope we're getting to the point where we understand that, PS2 remaster should run at 4K on modern consoles. The Switch version, there's no doubt in my mind the Switch could at least run these games docked at like 1080. Like, this, you cannot tell me that it couldn't at least do that. The other thing that's kind of frustrating, this is the Master Collection or whatever. I think it would have been really cool to... I don't know how hard 3DS emulation is on hardware, but I can't imagine it could be that difficult considering the relatively weak architecture of a 3DS. I think it would have been really cool, even if you just throw the second screen of the 3DS in a corner or something, to, emulate the 3DS version of Snake Eater. I think a lot of people would love to play that, like, on their console in 4K or something. I think they're, like... A lot of people, again, it's like a Twin Snakes thing, where, like, crouch movement and third-person aiming and stuff makes the game too easy. And maybe it does, but it would be a really cool way to play the game separately from, like, the PS2 version. And I'm going to say the same thing about MGS1. I think, again, I know GameCube emulation is... I'm not saying developing emulation is easy, but I'm saying as far as actual hardware required to run things nowadays is, quite lax as far as what you need. I think it would have been great to have the Twin Snakes alongside MGS1. I think, again, if Konami executives wanted to pour actual money in this to show how much this meant to people, and I know they don't care about that, but money too, like, again, do something that somebody like me would go out and buy day one, right? This all comes down to money, and make it so people like me would even want to go buy it, right? I'm normally the first one in line to get a remaster, right? Like, I love replaying games. I love seeing, like, visual upgrades to older games and stuff like that. Like, I'd be the first person in line to buy this, and I didn't. Like, for once in my life, I didn't get some sort of re-release or collection or something. But yeah, I feel like Twin Snakes is incredibly important. GameCube emulation, you could run that at 4K. There's no excuse for it. And then also, I'd say include, even if you have to, like... I don't know how hard it would be to port this. I don't know if you could just emulate a PC in an acceptable manner on a console or something, but I think the PC version would have been really good just for the historical value of it, because it is incredibly interesting and quite different in numerous ways. I think people would really love that. If you could play the original PC port of MGS1, or you could play Twin Snakes on your PS5 or something. And maybe there's licensing issues with the Twin Snakes stuff. It's just, this is the kind of stuff. You can't tell me Konami doesn't have money from all the pachinko stuff. Like, throw some money at this. Like, even if you yourself don't care as a business executive, I feel like in business, it's better to make a product that's good. And I don't even think, it's not like asking for an entirely new development of a game, like, like the Snake Eater 3 remake or whatever. I feel like overall this would still be a cheaper project. Like, so I'm really baffled. It's like they didn't even want to throw money at it. It's like whatever. I really would like to know the budget of this project, because it can't be high at all. Like, there is so much cool stuff they could have been doing with this, and I'm not saying it would have made sense for this collection, but I think, like, portable hops, like even if it's just PSP emulation, I feel like that's important. And I feel like there's so much you could do. Oh, sorry, I forgot. You can play Metal Gear 1 and 2. That's great. MSX games are very easy to run on everything. You can play them on the PS2. I'm still not super big into Metal Gear 1 and 2. I think they're totally fine. Definitely check them out. But I don't think they have the same impact as anything from the 3D era onward. And that's not me not liking older video games. I have a video on a TurboGrafx pinball game, So, for MGS1. So, I do not expect, nor would I like the game to run at higher than 240p. I personally, again, it's one of those things where I like using original hardware on the original displays it was intended for. Like, I have my PS1 hooked up to the CRT. And I understand that's not, feasible for everyone to keep that kind of stuff lying around. But I do think we should at least, because this has been options for years through emulation and stuff, because obviously MGS1 is just emulation, just PS1 emulation. Scanlines are a must for that kind of, that kind of game. And then, well, at least the option. Maybe some people really don't want it, but it's really good at not making things look like crap when you're talking about stuff designed for a CRT. And whatever bilinear filtering is going on is muddying up the image so incredibly bad. I literally think it would look better if you hooked up the piece of garbage that is the PlayStation Classic and hooked that up to your TV. I think it would look better. Even like an unmodded PlayStation Classic would probably look better than the Master Collection on any console. It doesn't matter what console I'm talking about with the Master Collection, pretty much. It all just looks bad. But, integer scaling exists nowadays, along with scan lines. We could have made this sharp and pristine and have scan lines in it. And I don't mean like over sharpening an image. I just mean like accurately presenting how it's supposed to look. And then, still include like a smoothing, filter. People want that kind of stuff. But to have that be the default and the only way to display the game with no scan lines, completely unacceptable. I don't like, MGS1's PS1 version at 4K with widescreen. The underlying material doesn't look good enough for that, and I think it makes the image look worse. We definitely need to hide the image between scan lines and lower resolutions, I think. That is not the same for MGS2 and 3. The quality of the materials on display is much higher. I don't want to hear that argument that, the models weren't designed for 4K. The models weren't designed for 720p either, and they look incredible in, the original HD collection when you're talking about the target hardware. Running them at 4K, running anything at 4K that's from like the PS2 is overall, sure, you could probably make some adjustments to textures and stuff like that. It's still going to look better than running at 720p. A PS1 game, I'm going to say not so much because we're hitting a certain limit where just rendering at a higher resolution isn't going to make things look better because at that point you're showing all the mistakes within the original image. Not that I'm saying the original has like purposeful mistakes in its rendering. It's just like, our hardware was way weaker, our expectations were way different. And as far as what's actually being rendered underneath the fuzz of your CRT and scan lines is, it hides a lot. And overall, the image, I think, improves from hiding it a bit. Now, people are going to have different opinions on that. I'm not asking MGS1 to be in 4K. But, again, with modern emulation, it's totally possible to do that. And some people might like that option. And I think it should definitely be there. When fan emulation is better than your official collection, something went incredibly wrong, in my opinion. This is what's so frustrating. And it's like, it's whatever philosophy behind like Steam and stuff like that, where it's like, if you make officially buying things and playing them easier and better than piracy, then people are going to buy it. I think overall consumers want the easiest and best way to play games, right? Again, so Konami's charging $60 for this, right? And it's like, it is like arguably the worst way to play these games. I understand if you only have a PS5, only have a PS4, only have a Switch. Like, I'm not saying don't get this collection. Like, if you think you're going to have fun with it and 720p is acceptable to you, go buy it. But like, don't be like acting like this is acceptable for people that want a little bit more quality in their re-releases, right? Like, I think it's really unfair to say that people are asking for too much to have these render at higher than 720p or have frame drops where they didn't exist before. And again, we have the Switch version of MGS2 running at 30 FPS when the PS2 version didn't. I understand it's a higher resolution, but the original PS2 version did not run at 30 FPS. That is completely unacceptable. Again, a re-release and I'm not talking about a remake, I'm talking about a re-release of something, should never be running worse on better hardware. I don't get it. It's really baffling to me. But yeah, there needs to be, like, the official way, like, say, especially, we're talking about Steam. Like, I don't see a reason why anybody should buy this collection on Steam, except for maybe MGS3 or something. Like, I would rather spend $10 on good old games, buy MGS1 in there, and run some of the fan patches, and run it at widescreen or something like that. Like, if I was an average consumer, that makes more sense to me. Or for MGS2, I hope you had the original GOG version, because at least that with, like, again, fan patches, you can run it at 4K and widescreen and all this kind of stuff. When it's more busted in the current release trying to run things at a high resolution. And the fact that, like, it has no graphical options, I've never seen a modern PC release like that. It's absolutely insane to me. But again, and, we're not talking about piracy, but again, like, the fan versions of stuff shouldn't be better than the official releases from the companies themselves. We should never be at a point where a company releases a collection in this day and age, and then it's better for me to just use a PS2 emulator or PS3 emulator with my already existing game, my already existing dump of my game. I should want to go buy this collection being the biggest Metal Gear Solid fan ever. I should have been wanting to get this day one. I would have loved to buy the series, like, have it, like, on a disc and stuff too, and buy it on the Series X and play some MGS2 at 4K on my Series X. I was hoping it was going to be like that. And then we saw the 1080p, and then it was like, maybe just be upskilled, and then to learn everything's still just 720p, and it's just inferior to Blue Point's original work. I don't understand how we got here. Like, again, I can take guesses. I don't know, it's like executives and it's money and it's all this kind of stuff. I just haven't seen anything this incredibly disappointing when it comes to a re-release, and I really can't think of anything else. I understand modern releases being, bug-ridden and poor in performance and all that kind of stuff, but I'm talking about already existing code and porting it. I really don't think I've seen this. It's crazy to me. I love Metal Gear Solid. I guarantee the people that worked on the Master Collection probably love Metal Gear Solid. This probably isn't what they wanted to release. I think nobody wanted this, I don't think. And I'm not crapping on you if you're enjoying it and you think this was worth your money. I'm really not. I'm glad you're having fun. Knowing that there's people experiencing, like, MGS2 for the first time is really cool to me. There's something very special about that. But again, as far as what the fans honestly deserve, and more so what the original developers deserve to have their work preserved like this is really insulting, and it's a huge shame. And I wanted a reason to give Konami my money again, and they couldn't do that. And I'm the easiest person to please when it comes to playing a video game. Like, I can, because I'm always coming from like real people behind this with real deadlines and real budgets, and I'm always understanding this kind of stuff and usually trying to see the good in everything when it comes to technology. And this is like the first time in a while where I'm like, I can't. This just sucks. It sucks for everybody involved, and it's a shame that this is the precedent being set right now, because this is Volume 1, and if we're going to get a Volume 2, and they're possibly going to, for the first time, try to port Metal Gear Solid 4, I'm like, what is it going to be like? There's no existing port to work from here. Like, I've heard rumors way back when, that, like, MGS4 was running on 360, it's just they didn't want to ship 7 DVDs. Understandable. So I've heard rumors that existed, but, I doubt any of that code's even around. Even if that's even, like, real, I don't know. It could have just been, like, a rumor. But it's not like we have, a company like Blue Point that ported it to PS4 at some point, and then they can take that work and see what they can do with it, even if they're rendering it and running it exactly how it was before. It's like, there is no pre-existing work done on porting MGS4 that I know of, that I think anybody knows of. And this is a really bad precedent to see how what should have been like a slam dunk for Konami ended up being, like, quite terrible, to be honest. And again, I'm not saying it's super buggy or anything like that. It's just incredibly mediocre. And these games deserve so much better than that. And I am incredibly worried to see how they would handle a port of like MGS4. With stuff like, if they're doing like PSP stuff or whatever, I can see them using PSP emulation, or for Peace Walker, again, Bluepoint's work exists. And it's, in my opinion, it's great. I understand they can't get Bluepoint to do it again. I think Sony owns them now. So I don't think Bluepoint's going to do the work, especially considering this stuff is still releasing on PC and Series X and Switch and all this kind of stuff. It's understandable in the world of business. This kind of stuff happens. But there's other companies that can do this kind of stuff. Again, like, if we're going to go down the emulation route, there's companies that do that too. This is already getting a little bloated. I'm probably going to be repeating my footage 3 times. I honestly didn't think I had this much to say about it, but I really, honestly, truly do. I'm a huge fan of the series. I'm sure a lot of other people are. The teams that worked on these games were incredibly intelligent and creative, and honestly, even technologically, very efficient. They really were. Like, even technologically. MGS2 and 3 are incredible. MGS4 is incredible. Peace Walker is incredible on the PSP. And look at Ground Zeroes and Phantom Pain. That's still some of like the best PS4, Xbox One code as far as how efficient it is. And especially the PC code. Like I had an original 2021 model Aya Neo, which isn't the best piece of hardware, and I'm running the Phantom Pain 800p with like all the settings like maxed at 60, you know? These people were incredibly talented, and it's a shame that this is how the work is being presented to a new audience. So, with that being said, what I'd honestly like to see is just, like, share your memories of Metal Gear Solid. Tell me how you came into the series. What was the first game you played? Your favorite game, your favorite character. Like, I love this series, and I know you do too if you're watching this, and I'd like to hear from you and your experiences. And, you know, if you're enjoying the new collection, tell me about that too, honestly. Just don't be a jerk about it. I'm not going to be a jerk about it, so please don't. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys later.